day, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Finance Technology Best Practices for the Utilities Industry. My name is Aileen McPherson. I'm Director of Marketing with CCH Tagetik North America, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. Today's webinar will last approximately 45 minutes. All listeners are on mute, so if you do have questions during the webinar, please submit them via the chat function. You can also direct your questions to the email showing on your screen, and we will follow up with you at the end of the webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Gina Smith is the Program Manager of Planning Systems and Budgets within the Corporate Finance and Planning Division of Central Hudson Gas and Electric Corporation, and has been with the organization for 17 years. She's had the opportunity to work within the accounting, regulatory, and finance and planning divisions, and these experiences have allowed her to develop extensive knowledge in operational and utility accounting, regulatory rate filings, and forecast and planning activities. Her current primary responsibility is to lead the development of the company's 5-year annual business plan process. And she's also responsible for the design, implementation, and continued development of the company's forecasting, budgeting, and planning systems. Thank you so much for joining us today, Gina.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me to take part.
Our second speaker is Harjat Ghai, Chief Operating Officer and founder of Delbridge Solutions. He oversees the sales and professional services organizations to ensure client success. With over 15 years' experience in corporate performance management, Harjat's unique combination of functional and technical know-how helps clients select and implement CPM solutions following best practices. And thank you for joining us, Harjat, as well.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
And our third speaker is Rob Konferowitz, a product experience principal at CCH Tagetik. In his 5th year with Tagetik, Rob focuses on helping companies make appropriate long-term strategic decisions on the corporate performance management solutions during their software evaluation cycles. And Rob's background in finance and consulting helps him translate customer requirements and industry challenges into best practices with CCH Tagetik. Thank you for joining us as well, Rob.
Absolutely. No, happy to be here. Thanks, Aileen.
Now let's review the agenda for today's webinar. Rob will begin and kick things off with a brief overview on finance transformation and the key disruptors and drivers to modernizing. He'll then discuss issues, trends, and pains facing finance leaders in the utilities industry. And from there, Gina will take us through the Central Hudson case study. And next, Harjat will share best practices and showstoppers in technology execution. Before we conclude the webinar, we'll move into an informal round of questions from our experts, and then we'll sign off. Before we begin with Rob's session, I just want to ask Harjat to quickly jump in and provide us with an introduction as to who Delbridge Solutions is. Harjat?
Thanks, Aileen. Delbridge Solutions was founded in 2011 by corporate performance management industry executives. Our DNA is implementing budgeting, forecasting, and reporting solutions. As Aileen mentioned, I am one of the co-founders at Delbridge. And prior to starting Delbridge, I managed a large team of consultants at IBM implementing Cognos TM1 and Clarity Systems implementations in North America. We are privately held with offices in Canada, the US, and Europe. As we are a private and boutique consulting shop, we are very nimble and flexible, and we're focused on addressing client needs and not bogged down with bureaucracy, which you'll find in larger consulting companies. We've got over 300 clients across multiple industry verticals, such as financial services, government, higher ed, healthcare, and so on. And, our broad cross-industry focus brings deeper perspective on industry best practices for our clients. We have over 60 consultants that specialize within that specific industry. We are a strategic reseller and implementation partner with many of the leading platforms in the market for corporate performance management, which includes CCH Tagetik, Adaptive Insights, Vena, Oracle, IBM Planning Analytics, Profix, and so on. And because we are not tied down to one CPM partner, this is why we are able to recommend from a broad selection of best industry platforms for budgeting, forecasting, and reporting. We have a dedicated consulting team for each product that we support. We have a proven methodology to help clients find their right solution for budgeting, forecasting, reporting based on their unique business requirements. And we can help clients with their vendor selection process because we do have deep knowledge and understand the strengths and shortcomings of each of the CPM products that we work with.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing who Delbridge is with the audience. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rob to provide a very quick intro into who CCH Tagetik is, and then Rob will continue on and walk us through finance transformation and the utilities industry overview. So over to you, Rob.
Hey, thanks a lot. So CCH Tagetik, we're deeply involved in the corporate performance management space, and ultimately we use our finance transformation platform to help over 1,000 different customers work on things such as planning and forecasting, or financial close and consolidations, or driving complex profitability analysis products, all certainly layered on with a ton of reporting capabilities. So we've worked, like I said, with over 1,000 customers, helping automate a lot of the financial, let's say, operations. And we've been in, this space for over 20 years, helping customers across many different industries. So we are industry agnostic, as you can see on the bottom hand of the screen. But what we've really been seeing, especially as of recently, there's a lot of traction also in specific industries such as utilities that we'll be talking about today, and certainly make note of some upcoming, let's say, challenges that we've noticed across the board, as well as to the utility industry specifically. And in terms of, let's say, some of those broad market trends and some of the common challenges that we've been really seeing when it comes to finance modernization, and when it really comes to kind of leveraging this finance transformation platform from CCH Tagetik. First and foremost, what we've been noticing quite a bit is changing expectations for the CFO, and those changes trickling all the way down to the entire department of the office of the CFO. So in essence, finance needs to be more of a business partner, more of a steward of the business, and really help a lot with more strategic decisions, and ultimately leveraging all of the data that they have access to help drive those decisions. And these changing expectations ultimately are kind of leading into some other areas where, things like driving a more modern business function is absolutely key, especially when a lot of these different data sources and these refineries of data may be sitting in different data sources. So having more of a modern approach and the overall finance modernization certainly key as a pressure from internal, let's say, changes in organizations, but then also external expanded requirements on the reporting side is certainly a big, let's say, key pillar that's driving a lot of these finance modernization projects. So, external reporting demands for things like lease accounting standards, for instance, or especially in the utility industry, maybe specific FERC requirements are all extremely important. And then on top of that, increasing, let's say, demand for more modern analytics. Right? It's one thing to be able to automate and collect all of these disparate data sources, but then to really refine and mine that gold and really come up with some meaningful insights from that data certainly requires potentially a new approach beyond just data collection. And of course, this also goes hand in hand with this concept of replacing legacy solutions, or maybe solutions that are a little bit more outdated, that have been around since maybe the 80s or 90s, that potentially aren't necessarily built from the ground up for some of these more, let's say, recent trends and challenges, which certainly leads into the final pillar there around embracing newer technology, and really embracing that newer technology, not only to drive some of these pillars, but to also start leveraging maybe some of the shortened workforce or the overburdened workforce currently employed in some of the organizations we work with. So also embracing that new technology to drive some of these other pillars is certainly part of the broader picture that we've noticed. And then when we specifically drill down into the utilities world, the energy and utilities world, certainly the macro trends apply. But when we start going a little bit more specific, we can really start seeing these trends being applied to things like extremely intensive capital appropriation processes, right? Or even working around more specific regulatory requirements where maybe sometimes the natural chart of accounts needs to be rolled up a little bit differently for external reporting purposes. or providing maybe a local government agency specific metrics when it comes to things like rate case development and maybe some of the assumptions used to start calculating the cost that will be absorbed on behalf of different customers. And then even certainly things like large volumes of data, especially in the utility world, as customers of these utility organizations start getting access to more and more tools. They start also providing these energy providers, let's say, more and more data. So accessing those large volumes of data, translating those large volumes of data into meaningful insights, certainly applies to this world here as well. And then if we were to kind of go a little bit more features functions oriented, right? So what we've typically seen is, certainly the ability to start massaging and collecting and bringing in lots of different data sources from various, let's say, data inputs, oftentimes in various formats, collected many different ways, even all the way down to individual transactions, right? So even working with, the millions of customers that some of our utility organizations deal with, it's large volumes of data, and oftentimes these large volumes have tons of granular inputs that spread about between different teams and different sources. Even things like supporting O&M planning capabilities, right? So the ability to basically be able to merge operation and maintenance type planning with the capital planning process all in one unified tool to ultimately drive a rate case development, certainly extremely important. And then even things such as the ability to rank, prioritize, even model out specific initiatives over a long time horizon are all key areas that we've helped many companies in the space out with.
Thank you for those insights, Rob, not just on finance transformation and the trends impacting modernization in general, but obviously that which is unique to the utilities industry. And with those kind of trends and features and functions in mind, I'd like to hand it over to Gina now to provide us with an introduction to Central Hudson and walk us through your own story. Over to you, Gina.
Thank you, Eileen. First, I'd like to give you a bit of background about Central Hudson. We're a regulated transmission and distribution energy company. Our headquarters are located in Poughkeepsie, New York. And in 2013, Central Hudson joined the Fortis family of transmission and distribution utility companies. Our service territory extends from the suburbs of New York City north to Albany, and it's our mission to deliver electricity and natural gas to an expanding customer base in a safe, reliable, courteous, and affordable manner. That being said, in order to achieve our mission, we need to be able to have the appropriate tools. These tools also include the appropriate software for our budget, forecasting, and reporting needs, which brings us to our case study. As a company needing to produce a 5-year annual business plan forecast, we're already using a solution, a software solution, that's Clarity 7. This solution has helped many ways for our company. But in addition to producing the annual 5-year business plan forecast, it's also helping us with the monthly projection process and analysis, as well as providing various reports that support our finance and planning departments, accounting departments, and regulatory department. Going forward, we recognize that we need that we have future needs that Clarity 7 could not accommodate. One of those future benefits is the ability to produce forecasted financial statements, most specifically the balance sheet and cash flow statements, since we are already forecasting the income statement. So just to give you a little background, some reasons for our needing a new solution, because as I mentioned, we are already on a solution, Clarity 7. So we've been on Clarity 7 about 10 years now. And basically, over the course of the 10 years, our company's business needs have changed. We need something more robust. As a company, we're looking to better align our regulatory needs with our forecasting. We're also needing, and I think Rob mentioned it just before, we have a homegrown utility GL system. So this homegrown system has a lot of bolt-on softwares, and we need to be able to integrate with multiple resources in order to get the data in order for us to forecast forward. We also need to look for a more robust multidimensional budgeting forecasting. Rather than looking strictly at number variations, our company has moved to a business driver analysis within the forecasting and variation analysis process. So we needed something a little bit more nimble than just looking at straight accounts. More were improved performance and user satisfaction. As I said, we're on a system that's about 10 years old, so it's showing its age a bit. Users are less patient to wait for longer rendering times, depending on the volume of the reports they might be running. We also have the current ability to switch between a rate case year and a normal calendar year. However, we were looking for a solution that would make it a little more seamless without complex levels of maintenance. We wanted to also expand our financial statement and modeling capabilities, as I mentioned. And one of the more important points was that Clarity 7 was no longer being supported in the fashion that it had in the past. So a lot of its structure is outdated, like the Internet Explorer, the MS Office support that's behind it. So as a company, it was prudent upon us to start to look for a new solution. In doing so, I wanted to talk a little bit about the road to Getic and what was our road to Getic, I guess. So over the course of 2 years, we vetted through multiple vendors. We partnered with Delbridge Solutions. We had already had a rapport with them. So part of what we were looking to do, they could help us with. They had an expertise in various software solutions, as Harjad has already mentioned. And they had already been supporting us with Clarity 7. So they knew our systems, they knew our processes. So in the end, they were able to partner with us and provide a value that we ourselves could not do for ourselves, and that being helping us to select or at least shorten the list of vendors that are out there for new solutions. So the way we started off was we started with some questionnaires to determine what our specific needs were to get that vendor shortlist. We were able to get it down to 3 vendors. And then we had multiple demos and hands-on workshops evaluating. Our project team, I think, probably set up at least 3 demos per vendor, had a hands-on session as well. And then from there, we basically were able to kind of sort through what was our needs, what was the scope of the project, and what was important to us as a company. And we landed with Getic. Just to give you a bit of background, we're still in the implementation of Getic currently, but the results so far is that we're seeing higher performance. We're definitely seeing streamlined administration. Clarity 7 had multiple templates and steps for us to take in order to just prepare for a business planning process. That has gone away with Getic. We're down to the very few steps and few templates. And then we're also seeing one of the things that we were looking forward, and that was the ability to switch between a rate case structure and a normal GL or a PSC structure that we're currently on. So that is more flexible without having the complexities that we have currently with the Clarity system. And another nice feature that we are experiencing is the FST tool, and that's basically a roll-up feature. So I had mentioned that before we were moving or had moved to a more business driver environment in our analysis, rather than doing just strictly accounts and variations per account. So this tool has given us the ability to roll up differently into these business drivers so that we can handle that type of analysis a lot less manual on our part. So in essence, we're seeing a lot of good things happening with the implementation thus far.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you so much for sharing your story and kind of where you've started, how you were able to identify what you were looking for and where you are to date. I know we've still got a few questions for you, and we'll cover those during the Q&A at the end, but thank you. And before we do get to that Q&A, I will ask Harjot to now jump in and share his experience and thoughts around best practices and implementation.
Thanks, Eileen. So we have Delbridge has put some bullets here with regards to best practice for implementations. And this is not only just for CCH Tagetik, it applies pretty much to any CPM platform that we implement. So some of the key, best practices for implementations are listed here. One of the first ones is really, making sure that, clients review their business process for any improvements before they implement any CPM solution. We often find that clients have inefficiencies or flaws in their existing business process, which could also be an Excel process for budgeting as an example. And we don't want them to replicate their Excel process in a new CPM solution, because if there's issues with their business process, and if those are not fixed, then, those issues would also be replicated in a new solution as well. So we always like to make sure we work with our clients early in the implementation to understand their business process in a lot of detail, and then make some recommendations for improving their business process following best practices prior to implementing the solution. We also recommend to our customers and clients that, when we are implementing and putting a project plan together, make sure we always leave some buffer time for any unforeseen events. In any implementation, you don't know what you don't know at the starting. There are many times that the requirements may significantly change during the implementation, or perhaps resources will not be available, and this can impact the project timeline significantly. We always recommend that, to our customers to leave a few weeks of buffer time to accommodate some changes or such changes. One of the key fundamentals in Delbridge's methodology is also making sure that clients invest in power user training early in the implementation. This is very important for us because we want to make sure our clients can assist in the development. We want our power users to help us during the project and implementation so that they can sit with us during the implementation, learn best practices, and build and become self-sufficient, post go live. Right. Gina also mentioned this a bit earlier. She mentioned this a bit earlier as well. Is we want to make sure we document key business requirements up front. During any project, we expect there will be some changes during the implementation. However, if requirements are not gathered up front, it's much more expensive and time consuming to make those changes later in the implementation because there may be redesign and wasted effort. So this could affect, the timelines and the budget for the project as well. We also recommend that, as part of the implementation, that we have regular project status meetings, at least once a week, where we can have a status with the core team to discuss, the progress of the project, discuss any concerns and issues, and make some decisions as a team. We always stress that there is no such thing as over communication, and the more you are aware, the better chance your project will finish on time and within budget. Another key best practice for implementation is to avoid any customizations as much as possible and try to use out-of-the-box functionality if those business requirements can be met with out-of-the-box functionalities. The reason why this is important is because typically customizations are not supported by the CPM vendor because it's outside the core base product, right? So if you have done customizations, there is a possibility that if there's a new release of the product or new version of the product or new bug fixes, this may impact your customizations and their customizations may not work or they will have to be retested. And lastly, we always suggest that, we have a deep discussion on the roadmap and strategy for your new technology for CPM. We always stress that, when you design your CPM solution for phase one, you should always consider what you want to do in the future phases as well. This way, the data model, for example, that we design it in a way for first phase that it can handle requirements in the future as well. So this will limit any sort of rework that we will need to do.
Thank you for those insights, Harjot. And again, I'd like to thank Rob and Gina along with Harjot for the great information and examples that they have shared so far. Just a few questions I'd like to throw out to the group. We'll start with Gina. What are some of the big differentiators in CCH Tagetik versus your previous solution?
Well, I think two specific points come to mind when I think about my current solution versus Tagetik. First and foremost, and I mentioned it before, we were looking for improved performance, and we have gotten improved performance. The solution that we had was older. Performance was becoming an issue. This move to Tagetik has shown that we can render reports faster. We're slicing and dicing data a lot better. Second point that comes to mind when I'm thinking about differentiators is that Tagetik has more out-of-the-box capabilities within the system. So as Harjat just mentioned in his giving advice to when you're planning your project, you want to avoid customization. So having these out-of-the-box capabilities within the system, it's a big part of the tools that are available to you. So for example, just to give one, we are very big in our analysis and looking at the drilling through to the details. So our current solution, we had to put in place a report and steps in order to make that tool happen. For Tagetik, that's an immediate availability. We didn't have to put any steps in place to have that available. So that in and of itself is value add for us.
Thank you for that. And, Harjat, I wonder if you could jump in. You work with a lot of clients in the industry, and I wonder if you've got any additional differentiators you'd like to add on to that aren't necessarily specific to Clarity 7 that you often advise of your prospects and clients as they go through an evaluation.
Sure, no problem. I mean, we always tell our customers, cloud is the present and it's the future, right? So for some reason, there are some clients who only look for on-premise solutions when they look for a CPM product, and they work with us to find an on-premise solution. But, we always tell our customers that, if you want to use on-premise now, make sure that the CPM platform you're looking into or we're helping you look into also has a cloud deployment option. This is important because you want to make sure that you have an option to migrate to the cloud in the future if your technology strategy changes as well. So, make sure your CPM platform you evaluate has a cloud option, even if you're looking for an on-premise solution, right? Other differentiators that I would strongly recommend to prospects that are participating in the webinar is making sure that the CPM platform you're evaluating has integration with Microsoft Office suite of products. So this doesn't include just Excel, but making sure that it has some sort of integration with Microsoft Word and PowerPoint. We find this is a very important feature because a lot of times clients use Excel for interacting with their data and their budgeting, forecasting, reporting solution, or they're using a web interface. But ultimately, they're building PowerPoint decks for board books, they're building budget books in PowerPoint decks, or they're building their external reports in Microsoft Word and publishing that to PDF as an example. But they're cut and pasting data from Excel or from the web and pasting it into the other, Microsoft Word and PowerPoint. So we always recommend that if there's direct integration with Microsoft Word and PowerPoint to your CPM application, it's much better because you're not cut and pasting data from Excel, which obviously can cause a lot of data integrity issues. And lastly, I would also make sure that, the CPM platforms that our clients are looking into and working with us on, making sure that there's prepackaged modules to speed up the implementation. So some CPM platforms in the market have modules for HR planning, CapEx planning, cash flow forecasting, and so on. And these modules are really important because, they will speed up your implementation time because, it's a lot of, it's just more configuration as opposed to starting from scratch. And a lot of times these modules have best practices already built into them as well. So we always recommend that, look for CPM platforms that have some modules that come out of the box, which will help you apply best practices, but also speed up your implementation time as well.
Great, thank you for that. Back over to Gina. I know Harjat did share some best practices around implementation in his session, but I wondered if there's specifically any lessons learned so far during your own implementation process that you'd like to share with the folks listening.
Yeah, I think the most important thought that I can share, and it's echoing some of what Harjat's already shared, is that you got to plan the right amount of time, or at least give the right amount of time during your project for designing and those designing sessions. You want to think critically through what your needs are, and like Harjat had mentioned before, maybe ask yourself, how can you do something better in your processes? But at the end of the day, you need to really understand what your requirements are in order to design it, and make sure that you thought through that in the design session and not in the later steps of your project. Because if you wait till the later steps in your project, you're going to wind up having a lot of rework and redo, time consumption, and it's not going to go very smoothly at all. Currently, we've tried to do that in our process, and it has helped us to make smoother the latter steps as we continue to implement. So I think that's the most important thing I could share.
Great, thank you. I'm going to keep putting you on the spot. So obviously, as you're going through your implementation now, you might be already starting to think of some future phases that you'd like to use CCH to get it for. What are some of those considerations?
Yes, most definitely. As you do projects, I think we all understand and recognize that you have to have a certain scope. So within this scope, we're looking at just, getting our 5-year business plan up and running, our monthly projections as well up and running. So that basically centers around the income statement. So potentially we're looking in order to be able to forecast out a balance sheet and cash flow statement 5 years worth. So those are future steps and benefits we're looking forward to. Another couple of the thoughts that we might be looking forward to would be maybe more of a rolling 5-year forecast rather than static. The way we said it, it's 5 years. So we can be a little more agile in doing our projections and our forecasts. And then another thought was to be a little bit more integrated with our financial model and modeling in and of itself. So that's more of a strategic steps for us as a company so that we can, get everything in alignment and have the tools at our fingertips to be able to make the best possible decisions going forward.
Great. Actually, I'm going to ask Rob, maybe you want to jump in at this point as well. I know you work with a lot of folks during their software evaluation, and you're there when they begin the implementation process and then come back and they're looking to build on their general technology roadmap. What do you typically see folks adding on once they've finished off phase 1?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's quite common, the phased approach with a full financial transformation platform. So oftentimes the natural kind of next steps are expanding areas in the platform. So maybe, starting with budgeting and planning and then, working on more comprehensive reporting, in PowerPoint or in Word to automate some of those board books. So I think that's quite, common, let's say, kind of next step. And then also even building out and going a little bit more detailed and maybe even a little bit more automated in the current process as well. So maybe going a little bit deeper into the planning world, using some of the newer technologies to extend maybe a planning environment to be a little bit more detailed, maybe even leverage things like, machine learning or predictive analytics to help also do a little bit more on the automation side, I think is also another path a lot of customers are expanding with.
Terrific. Thanks so much. I think at this time we will wrap the session. With the conclusion, I'll start with another big thank you, Gina, for sharing the Central Hudson story, Harjot for your insights in how you worked with Central Hudson as well as advise clients in the CPM space, and Rob on your insights in the utility industry in general and the trends that are impacting the Office of Finance in its effort to modernize. So thank you very much to the three of you for all of the information that you've shared with us today.
Pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
For those of you tuning in, if you do have some questions that you'd like to throw to our panel, you can send them to the email address showing on the screen. If you would like to be in touch with anyone or perhaps book a session where you might get an opportunity to view some of the technology and go into a bit more of a deeper dive, by all means, send your request through this email as well, and we'll be happy to connect those folks to you. It certainly was my pleasure to host today's webinar, and I want to thank you for tuning in and let you know that we are concluding the session at this time. Have a great day.